I know it almost sounds counterintuitive, and I think the reason that it sounds so opposite to what we would expect is because what we expect is the roadmap that being anxious and being fearful has laid out for us until from the time being from, whenever we started dealing with these sort of feelings, whether it's been our whole life, whether it's been the past few years, whatever it may have been, your anxiety is dependent on the fact of you acting and behaving in a certain way. Because as a result of your past behaviors, as a result of your past reactions and decisions, it has formulated itself, and I'm talking about your brain, by the way, your brain has formulated itself in a way in which all of the supporting evidence is showing that you prefer to live in an anxious state because of the reinforced actions that you've been taking. So, in my opinion, and what I have found extremely useful is to actually be unpredictable to your own mind. And what I mean by that is we create a distinction between what we feel, what we experience, that anxiety, that fear, and we create a space between that and what we do. We separate them. So now what we do is not actually dependent on how we feel, but rather what we do is dependent on what we want. And that's a huge difference. And in my opinion, I think that's where everything actually begins to change. Because if you're waiting to not feel anxiety to act or behave in a certain way to make certain decisions, then it's never going to happen. Nothing's ever going to change because your brain doesn't change on its own. It changes itself from supporting evidence. And the amount of anxiety you feel is oftentimes dependent on the actions that you're taking in response to prior anxiety. And that's what your brain learns from. So let's say that you're anxious about a certain situation, and it would be significantly easier to just feel that anxiety and not do the thing. Let's say this thing is optional, maybe going on stage and saying something or volunteering, whatever it may be. It's optional. And you are currently in this weird sort of battle, this dance with anxiety where you're trying to overcome it. You're trying to be this new version of yourself who is not plagued and who is not held back as much by anxiety. The very predictable thing that you would do is remain in your seat. So yeah, we're going to use the example of coming up to a stage and saying a few words, okay, in front of a big crowd. That's nerve-wracking for pretty much anybody. But the predictable thing to do would be to, obviously stay in your seat. You feel that anxiety, maybe you don't want to get picked or called out or whatever it may be. That's the very predictable thing to do. The very unpredictable thing to do that would completely shock your nervous system and shock your mind would be actually to just raise your hand. Before you can even think about what you're going to say, before you can even think about why you're doing it, you just raise your hand. Because there's an impulse within you that says, if I do opposite to what anxiety says, I will feel less anxiety. So am I willing to feel the discomfort of this particular temporary moment for an everlasting peace and everlasting confidence that can result in me being free from anxiety for a significant amount of time, a long time, indefinitely? So that's what I mean by being unpredictable. And it spices up our life a lot. We have to embrace spontaneity. We have to embrace, last minute plans. We have to embrace these sort of things because what anxiety does so well is, you know, it likes to cater itself and excuse itself in certain ways. So you needed to know about a plan 2 days ahead of time. Of course, this is more formalities once you're an adult and you have plans and work, whatever else. I'm not really talking about that. Let's say, you're free. You actually do have the free time. You do have the availability to go do something, and you're invited to something that you probably would have done if you had the time to mentally prepare for it. But why do we need mental preparation to go outside? Why do we need mental preparation to go socialize? We don't. It's actually anxiety that needs to be comforted and soothed and prepared before said event, before said, hangout or whatever it may be. So, and this is these weird details, and this is the things I really like talking about, is the very subtle and not really noticeable things in our life, because I think that's actually what creates the most amount of difference. It's not going to be from this big revelation of saying, "Oh yeah, I can just choose a different choose a different identity, and not be anxious." It's like, yeah, that's fundamentally true, but it's so nuanced, and the actual particular things that are going to set you free in a real way is finding these embedded patterns that have anxiety written all over it. You've accepted a way of living, and it's now time to live in a different way. It's now time to be more unpredictable, more spontaneous, and don't be afraid to embrace that. And don't be so sure that the discomfort that comes from spontaneity, from being unpredictable, is a sign that you're doing something wrong. That's where a lot of people kind of relapse, I like to say, in the anxious sort of thought circle and thought loop, is that they believe that because something is uncomfortable, it's inherently not the right thing to do. But that's not true at all, because breaking free is uncomfortable. Breaking free is going to create and cause discomfort within you temporarily. So imagine you have this mindset that whatever's uncomfortable is inherently wrong. And that's the reason why you're never breaking free. Because you think that breaking free is going to feel like peace, it's going to feel like inner liberation. And it will. But before it feels like that, it's going to feel like shit. That's the whole point. Is that you go through the storm and then it feels good. There is literally no way out of avoiding feeling that discomfort that you've kind of been brushing along. You know that sort of feeling where you're carrying around a medium sense of anxiety. You're not fully anxious and you're not fully feeling confident and free. But you're sort of in that weird middle place where you don't want to do anything to trigger you into, feeling really anxious. And actually, the fear of feeling that deeper sense of anxiety is actually another behavioral pattern that's keeping us trapped because we believe that the abyss, the anxious abyss that lays beneath us, is infinite and infinitely uncomfortable and it's going to be the worst thing we ever experienced. When in reality, it's probably just a little bit of discomfort that temporarily passes through. And our fear and our walking on eggshells around our anxiety is actually causing us the most harm more than anything else. It's really the fear of feeling it that is making it way worse. And like I said before, if we want to be unpredictable, if we want to be spontaneous, then we can't negotiate with that feeling of anxiety. We can't negotiate with that feeling of worry. We have to realize that as soon as we make the distinction between us as a person and the anxiety that we experience, we can start to become free of it. Because it's true. There are moments where you don't feel anxious, and in those moments, you are still you. And when you are experiencing anxiety, you are still you as well, but you are you experiencing anxiety. When you feel peace, you are you experiencing peace. So you see that the self is separate. The self is the experiencer of said emotion. It's not the emotion itself. Just because you experience anxiety doesn't make you inherently anxious. What makes you inherently anxious all the time is your association with an anxious identity, an anxious version of yourself. It sounds so easy in theory just to feel the anxiety but not allow yourself to act on it. But you have to be willing to feel that discomfort. And in a weird, I don't know, crazy way, aren't you a little bit curious of the feeling that you've been avoiding this whole time? And I'm not saying that as, that the feeling's a good thing, but I'm just saying, this very thing that you fear, if you just said, okay, I'm just going to go about my life, and if it happens, it happens, aren't you curious if it's actually going to be the very thing that you fear this whole time? And there's no way because everything is always worse in the imagination because the imagination has no limits. You know, your nervous system will eventually calm down. Your breath will eventually calm down. These things will eventually calm down. But in the imagination, there's no such thing as temporariness because there's no limits to the amount of suffering that we can endure. So that's why it's so important to stop living and negotiating with the anxiety in the mind and allowing the body to present itself with any discomfort that may come up as a result of you acting in, any sort of unpredictable or spontaneous way. It's really the anxious thoughts in the mind that we're negotiating with. We're not negotiating with the actual anxiety in our body because the actual anxiety in our body is relatively neutral. It's just an emotional response to whatever conversation we're having in our mind or whatever we believe the environment around us is situated like or the people around us, whatever it may be, any situation. More importantly than the mind is the feeling in the body. So let us detach from the mind. Let us not say how we know, sorry, let us not predict how this quote unquote anxiety is going to unfold. Let us not even predict that. So if we're aiming to be more unpredictable, be more spontaneous, what's going to stop you is the fear of what that anxiety might look like as a result of you acting and behaving in a certain way. So, but why is that though? Is it because you believe that you are more equipped to feel discomfort in your home than you are outside of your home? See how all these little things, all these little hidden beliefs add up to a sense of self and a belief in our life experience that is keeping us in that same sort of state of being. In the last episode, I think I talked about, walking up to a cashier, ordering a coffee, and not being afraid to be a little bit too loud. And it's those same little behaviors, just in every single different way. So notice how when you're invited to something last minute, is it because you really do need the mental preparation? Or is it because you need to soothe your anxiety to the environmental factors and the other triggers that might be at play? Do you really need to think about if you want to do it? Or do you actually want to go, but you're seeing if your anxiety will let you go? And that's a huge difference. And you believe that anxiety has these sort of handcuffs on you, when in reality it doesn't. It's depending on the very fact of you not acting against it. That's what it's depending on. The whole thing's a shadow. The whole thing is a sort of illusion that we're buying into. Don't get me wrong. The discomfort of anxiety is real in the body. It's real. You could feel a heightened sense of alertness and discomfort, but that will eventually pass if you sit with it long enough. That will eventually pass. We'll get used to the whatever environment we're in. We'll get used to the people we're around. We'll start to settle down a little bit. So it's important that we let the body become acclimated to a growing degree of different environments. If your nervous system is only ever calm in your home, that's a pretty tight rope to be walking on. And it's a pretty limiting sort of life to live. Because why are we training and teaching our nervous system? Because don't get me wrong, we taught our nervous system. We regulated our emotions in a way where we've created this paradigm where we can only fully relax in our home. And if we're anywhere else, we're stressed. And do we really think this is because the outside world is so stressful? Sure, the outside world can be stressful, but not everywhere in the outside world is stressful. And if we're going to create such tight dynamics on us being free of anxiety, of us being comfortable, why don't we at least try to train ourselves and train our nervous system in a way where we can feel that same sense of comfort and peace in outer environments? And how we do that, and the method I'm teaching right now, is a shock factor. We shock the nervous system and we force it to adapt through unpredictability and through spontaneity. So when you see anxiety and you act in a way that opposes that natural tendency to hide away and cower away from it, then you're now teaching your nervous system to prioritize different things. You're showing that even if anxiety is present, it's not going to deter you and act as a compass for your decision making and your choices. And that's what the brain learns from. The brain wants to know what signals lead to what reaction. How do I keep this human safe? How do I keep this human alive? Okay? And the method here is not to try to do something to the brain that's unnatural. It's to use the rules already embedded in the sort of biochemistry of the mind and use it in our favor. So we have to show the mind that actually living free of anxiety keeps us alive more than living in anxiety. Does that make sense? When we show the mind certain actions, when we prioritize certain experiences, we show the mind, this is what I'm prioritizing. This is what keeps me alive. The anxiety doesn't help me. The anxiety doesn't keep me alive. And we show it, we communicate this by not reacting to it. By not reacting to fear, by not reacting to anxiety, we show the mind that it serves no purpose. And anything that doesn't serve a purpose is going to not be prioritized by the brain. And of course, there is a sense of, grit and relentlessness that needs to be at play here. And I've said this many times, and it's not a nice thing to hear, but it's something I've definitely needed to hear, and I probably will need to hear more often, is that if you don't want to be free, you won't be. If you don't want to be free bad enough, you won't be. If you aren't willing to break the pattern bad enough, it won't break. And that's the brutal truth of anything, because there's no negotiation. There's no way around it. There's only the discomfort, and there's only how long is it going to take you to face that discomfort. Because if you face that discomfort today, you're going to be free a day earlier. If you face that discomfort tomorrow, you'll be free a day later. So it's only a matter of time. Facing discomfort makes you better equipped at facing discomfort. It doesn't sound like rocket science, but it's almost like emotional rocket science in the way that we always avoid it, and we're looking to do anything else and distract ourselves from the very nature of what's required from us. By facing discomfort, you get better at facing discomfort. Discomfort starts to become less intense until the point where it takes something extremely unpredictable to make you anxious because you are an unpredictable force. You are now the unpredictable force. You are now the relaxed, easy sense of comfort and peace everywhere you go. Now that's you. You look at other people who seemingly behave in this way, and whether they trained and learned that state of being, oftentimes they didn't. Oftentimes they maybe got a little bit, a psychological luck of the draw. But that's besides the purpose, because there's no distinct difference between you and them except for what's been trained and ingrained into the nervous system. We can say that maybe you and whoever else that deals with anxiety is predisposed to anxiety. That can be true. And in the same right, it can be true that you have the exact same facilities to train your brain and train your nervous system to experience the same amount of anxiety as that person that looks to be emotionally free and regulated. That's what we have to stop doing. We have to stop associating ourselves with the category of anxiety. We experience anxiety. And from this moment on, we're going to work in certain ways. We're going to be unpredictable and spontaneous in ways that are going to define our category. We no longer, if there's a bucket of anxiety and non-anxiety, we are no longer associating ourselves with the bucket of anxiety. We dip our toes in sometimes, and then we jump back into the bucket of not having anxiety. Because that's the truth of it. The only people who are swimming in the bucket of anxiety are those who associate and label themselves as an anxious person. There's probably a person who feels a similar amount of anxiety as you, but they've completely not shifted their identity around that anxiety, and they don't hold the belief that they're an anxious person. If anything, they might not even know that they're experiencing anxiety. They just know that they experience discomfort. They just know that they avoid certain things, that certain things trigger them into feeling a certain way. But it's probably because you've psychoanalyzed and seen and observed in yourself and, Googled and watched psychology videos that you now realize that what you're experiencing is anxiety. But now because you experience it, you don't fall in that bucket of people who are anxious. You only fall into that bucket if you believe yourself to be someone who is naturally anxious. You are not naturally anxious. You experience anxiety for one reason or another, and if you take certain steps, the ones that we talked about in this video, you will experience less anxiety. To the degree it works is to the degree you are willing to dedicate. And of course, there are, you know, special cases. There are always going to be outliers. But when I say that, I only say that because there's probably going to be someone watching who's maybe referencing the discomfort they're feeling with anxiety when it's really something else. But for 99% of you who are listening to this video that are experiencing actual anxiety, and you know it is, I mean, you don't question it. You are probably, that's what you're experiencing. And the steps that I'm saying will work. And the fact of the matter is, I only added that little caveat. So I'm not marginalizing everybody into the same group that can, be helped with the same advice. But the truth of the matter is if you take certain steps and show your brain a certain version of yourself, your brain's going to start shifting itself and reformulating itself to act and behave in a certain way. That's just the truth. And it's about separating yourself from your anxiety, seeing that you, as the experiencer of anxiety, can choose to be unpredictable and spontaneous. And the more you choose to do that, the more you choose to not pre-plan, to pre-worry, to scope out the environment, scope out the people ahead of time, always planning, always worrying. The more you leave that mindset, the more you don't feed those types of behaviors, the more you shift into the identity of someone who can be at peace whenever the moment calls for it. And frankly, be at peace in most moments because now their degree of tolerance is much higher. That's it for today's video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm going to leave a link to my book down in the description if you want to check it out. I dive into this and a bunch of other topics. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, thank you as always. And other than that, I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.